During my third round of chemotherapy, my husband emptied our joint account to take his 28-year-old girlfriend to Bali, using the insurance money meant for my cancer treatment. When he returned home 2 weeks later, expecting to find me desperate and defeated, I handed him divorce papers and watched his face crumble as my lawyer explained how I'd secretly transferred all our assets into accounts he couldn't touch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first thing I noticed when I woke up that morning was the silence. 3 months into my breast cancer treatment, I had become accustomed to the sounds of an empty house. The subtle creaking of floorboards settling, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing on our quiet suburban street. But there was something different about this silence. Something final. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, wincing at the soreness in my arm where the chemo port had been inserted. No messages from Michael, no missed calls. Nothing to indicate my husband of 19 years had even thought about me during the night. The previous evening, he had informed me that he needed to take an emergency business trip to Singapore for a week, the same excuse he'd used twice already since my diagnosis. At 51, after almost 2 decades of marriage, I recognized the signs. The late-night phone calls he took in the garage, the sudden attention to his appearance, the unexplained charges at restaurants I'd never heard of. The classic indicators of infidelity that I might have confronted in healthier times, but now lacked the energy to address while fighting for my life. With effort, I pushed myself into a sitting position and reached for the anti-nausea medication on my bedside table. Today was supposed to be a good day in my treatment cycle, one of the rare days when the crushing fatigue and nausea receded enough to allow some semblance of normalcy. I had planned to use this precious window of energy to review our finances and ensure everything was in order for the upcoming immunotherapy treatments my oncologist had recommended. My diagnosis 6 months ago had come as a complete shock. Stage 3 breast cancer at 51 with no family history and a lifetime of annual mammograms. The initial fear had quickly given way to practical considerations: treatment options, survival rates, insurance coverage, and work accommodations. As CFO of a regional healthcare system, I understood better than most the financial implications of serious illness, even with comprehensive insurance. Michael, to his credit, had initially seemed supportive. He had accompanied me to the first 2 appointments, held my hand during the preliminary consultations, and assured me we would face this together. But his attention had waned quickly. His real estate development business suddenly required more of his time than ever before. The woman he'd recently hired as his administrative assistant, Vanessa, according to the company website, apparently needed extensive after-hours training. I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, moving carefully to avoid the dizziness that sometimes accompanied sudden movements. Our house, a sprawling Tudor in an upscale Connecticut neighborhood, had once been our shared dream. Now it felt like an elaborate stage set, a backdrop for a life that no longer aligned with reality. I brewed a cup of ginger tea and opened my laptop at the kitchen island. Time to address our finances. Michael and I maintained separate accounts for our personal spending, but shared a joint account for household expenses and major investments. We had agreed to deposit a significant portion of my insurance reimbursement into this account to cover the substantial out-of-pocket costs of my treatment. I logged into our bank portal, entered the password, and waited for the accounts to load. When the numbers appeared on the screen, I blinked, certain I was misreading them. The joint account balance showed $427.16. Last week, it had contained over $218,000. My hands trembled as I reviewed the recent transactions. A single withdrawal, made yesterday afternoon, had emptied the account. The transaction details showed it had been transferred to Michael's personal account, an account I didn't have access to. I reached for my phone and dialed Michael's number, straight to voicemail. I called his office. His new assistant informed me in a syrupy voice that Mr. Harrington was unavailable and would be out of the office for the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Not the 1 week he had mentioned to me. May I ask where he's traveling? I kept my voice steady, professional. A moment's hesitation. I believe he mentioned Bali. Bali, not Singapore, and certainly not an emergency business trip. Our real estate development company had no projects or partners anywhere in Asia. I thanked her and ended the call, my mind working with a clarity I hadn't experienced since beginning chemotherapy. The fog of illness and treatment suddenly lifted, replaced by a cold, crystalline awareness. This wasn't just casual infidelity. This was calculated betrayal at the moment of my greatest vulnerability. With methodical precision, I opened a new browser tab and logged into Michael's email. We had shared passwords early in our marriage, a practice he had apparently forgotten about or assumed I had abandoned. His inbox confirmed what I already knew. Michael had indeed flown to Bali. First-class tickets for 2. Reservation at an GIC exclusive resort known for its private villas and discretion. A receipt for a diamond bracelet from Tiffany's with a note attached. For V. Something to remember our special trip. V. Vanessa. His 28-year-old assistant with the Instagram account full of filtered perfection and inspirational quotes about taking what you deserve. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, watching as our neighbor's gardener trimmed their perfectly manicured hedges. The mundane normalcy of the scene stood in stark contrast to the implosion of my life. My husband had stolen money intended for my cancer treatment to finance a luxury vacation with his mistress. The appropriate response would be devastation, collapse. Perhaps calling my sister in hysterics or confronting Michael in a flurry of righteous anger. Instead, I felt an unexpected emotion taking root. Determination. Not just to survive this betrayal, but to ensure Michael faced consequences for his actions. I had spent my entire career managing complex financial systems, implementing controls to prevent fraud, and developing strategies to maximize resources. I had navigated the labyrinthine world of healthcare finance through 3 major regulatory overhauls. I had restructured failing departments and salvaged seemingly unsalvageable budgets. I had spent decades cultivating professional relationships with attorneys, financial advisors, and insurance specialists. And Michael had just made the catastrophic error of underestimating me because I was ill. I returned to the laptop and opened a new search. Divorce attorneys specializing in financial fraud, Connecticut. As I reviewed the results, a plan began to form. Not a frantic reaction, but a strategic response that would leverage every professional skill I had developed over my career. My phone buzzed with a text from my oncologist's office reminding me of my appointment the following week. The immunotherapy treatment we had discussed would cost thousands, even with insurance. Money that was now funding Michael's romantic getaway. I replied, confirming the appointment. Then I made a second cup of tea and settled in at the kitchen island, opening a fresh document to outline my strategy. Michael had made his move, assuming that my illness had left me powerless. He had calculated that by the time he returned, I would be too desperate for financial stability to challenge his actions. But he had failed to consider one crucial factor. For the first time in months, I had something more powerful than cancer to focus on. I had purpose. I had righteous anger. And I had 20 years of financial expertise that was about to become his worst nightmare. As I began typing, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my diagnosis. A sense of control. Michael would return from his paradise expecting to find me broken. Instead, he would discover that his betrayal had awakened something in me that chemotherapy had temporarily subdued, my uncompromising capacity for strategic thinking and methodical execution. The cancer might have weakened my body, but it had not diminished my mind. And in underestimating both, Michael had made a mistake he would soon profoundly regret. The sun had barely risen when I woke the next morning. For the first time since, my diagnosis. It wasn't pain or nausea that pulled me from sleep, but purpose. I lay still for a moment, taking inventory of my physical state. The bone-deep fatigue remained, but something had changed in my mental landscape. The fog of illness and betrayal had crystallized into clarity. I reached for my journal on the nightstand, a leather-bound book my colleague Janet had given me, when I began treatment. "Record your journey," she'd said. "Not just the medical details, but what you're thinking, feeling. It helps more than you'd expect." Until now, I'd made only sporadic entries about treatment side effects and appointment schedules. Today would be different. "Day 1 of reclamation," I wrote. "Michael believes he has won. His miscalculation will be my salvation." In the kitchen, I prepared a protein smoothie following my nutritionist's recommendations. My body needed strength for what lay ahead. I opened my laptop and reviewed what I'd begun the previous evening, a comprehensive inventory of our financial landscape. After 19 years of marriage, our assets were thoroughly entangled, or so Michael believed. What my husband had forgotten, or perhaps never fully appreciated, was that I had managed our financial planning from the beginning. As CFO of Regional Health Partners, I'd approached our personal finances with the same methodical attention I brought to the hospital system's $600 million annual budget. I pulled up our financial records and began a systematic review. Our primary residence valued at $1. $2 million with $340,000 remaining on the mortgage. The vacation property in Vermont, purchased primarily with my inheritance from my father. Michael's real estate development company, technically owned solely by him, but built with substantial loans using our joint assets as collateral. Investment accounts, retirement funds, valuable artwork purchased over the years. Most importantly, I focused on account structures and access privileges. Which accounts required dual authorization for large transfers? Which had Michael as the primary with me as merely a secondary signatory? Which were in my name only? The picture that emerged confirmed what I had suspected. Michael had been systematically positioning himself for this moment. Over the past year, coinciding suspiciously with the hiring of Vanessa, he had been consolidating his access to our liquid assets while leaving the debts and fixed assets jointly held. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The insurance reimbursement theft was merely the culmination of a longer-term strategy. Had my cancer progressed according to the original, more dire prognosis, he would have emerged from widowhood with considerable assets and minimal encumbrances. When my treatment showed unexpected success, he had apparently accelerated his timeline. I felt a flash of cold anger, quickly replaced by calculated determination. Michael's betrayal was despicable, but his financial strategy was amateurish compared to the sophisticated fiscal structures I navigated daily in healthcare administration. He had made a critical error, underestimating me because I was ill. By mid-morning, I had outlined the complete state of our finances and identified 3 immediate vulnerabilities that needed addressing. The first call I made was to Anthony Reeves, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and high-asset divorce cases. His firm had handled several complex cases for the hospital when employees had misappropriated funds. "Catherine," Anthony greeted me warmly when his assistant put me through. "It's been a while. How are you feeling? Janet mentioned your treatment." "Anthony," I interrupted gently, "I need to speak with you professionally, not socially. I have a situation that requires immediate attention." The warmth in his voice shifted to professional focus. "I understand. How can I help?" I laid out the situation with clinical precision: Michael's infidelity, the theft of the insurance funds, his absence in Bali, and my preliminary financial assessment. "He used medical insurance reimbursements intended for your cancer treatment to take his mistress on vacation?" Anthony's voice held controlled outrage. While you're undergoing chemotherapy? Precisely, I confirmed. And I have reason to believe this is part of a longer-term strategy to separate me from our joint assets. Catherine, this isn't just grounds for divorce. This could potentially involve criminal charges. I'm not interested in criminal proceedings, I clarified. At least not initially. What I need is strategic intervention to secure my financial position before he returns from Bali in 13 days. I can be at your house in 2 hours, Anthony said. In the meantime, don't make any financial moves without consulting me. First, even with your expertise, there are legal considerations that could impact your position. After ending the call, I made myself another cup of tea and moved to the sunroom at the back of the house. Through the windows, I could see the garden I had meticulously planned, but now lacked the energy to maintain. The roses needed pruning, the hydrangeas were overgrown, and weeds had begun claiming territory along the stone pathways. The garden's state of neglect paralleled what had happened in my marriage. While my attention had been diverted by illness, untended problems had flourished in the shadows. But gardens could be restored with proper care and decisive intervention. So could financial security. My next call was to Dr. Ellis, my oncologist. Her assistant put me through immediately. Catherine, is everything all right? We're not scheduled until next week. I explained the situation regarding the insurance reimbursement funds, careful to stick to financial facts rather than emotional details. This is outrageous, Dr. Ellis said, her usual clinical detachment giving way to genuine anger. We need those funds secured for your next treatment phase. That's why I'm calling, I explained. I need documentation from your office confirming the medical necessity of these treatments and the expected costs. I also need financial records showing the insurance reimbursements were specifically allocated for medical expenses. I'll have my team prepare everything immediately, she promised. Catherine, should I be concerned about your ability to continue treatment? No, I assured her. I have separate funds that Michael cannot access. My treatment will proceed as planned. This wasn't entirely true. Accessing those funds would require liquidating investments at a less than optimal time. But maintaining my treatment schedule was non-negotiable. Cancer and Michael would not claim victory simultaneously. My third call was to Janet Chen, my closest colleague and the interim CFO covering my medical leave. Unlike the previous calls, this conversation would be more personal. Catherine, Janet answered immediately. How are you feeling today? I've been better, I admitted. Janet, I need to take you into confidence about something happening in my personal life that may have professional implications. I shared the situation, and Janet's response was immediate and unequivocal. What do you need from me? Just name it. 2 things, I said. First, I need to accelerate the vesting of my executive compensation package. There's a hardship clause that might apply given my medical situation. Consider it done. The board already approved the contingency when you began treatment. I just need to file the paperwork. Second, I continued, I need absolute discretion. Michael has connections on the hospital board, and I can't risk him being tipped off before I've secured my position. Catherine, you have my word, Janet assured me. After everything you've done for this organization, and for me personally, you have my complete loyalty. By the time Anthony arrived at my house that afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive financial dossier and developed a preliminary strategy. My professional training had taken over, transforming personal betrayal into a complex problem requiring methodical resolution. Anthony reviewed my materials with professional appreciation. Most clients come to me in emotional chaos, with little understanding of their financial situation, he commented. You've essentially done half my job already. Finance is my expertise, I reminded him, and right now it's my armor. We spent the next 3 hours developing a multi-layered strategy. The first priority was securing the remaining assets that Michael couldn't access yet. Anthony made several calls to financial institutions, invoking emergency protocols based on suspected fraud. By evening, we had frozen 2 investment accounts and redirected incoming insurance payments to a new secure account in my name only. The second priority was documenting the theft of medical funds. Anthony believed this would be crucial leverage, not just for the divorce proceedings, but for potential settlement negotiations. Michael has built his professional reputation on being a respectable businessman and philanthropist, Anthony noted, reviewing Michael's company website with its prominent community partner section. Public exposure of stealing his cancer-stricken wife's medical funds would devastate that image. As Anthony packed up his materials to leave, he paused at the front door. "Catherine, I've handled hundreds of high-conflict divorces involving substantial assets. Your situation is uniquely challenging given your health concerns, but you've already demonstrated remarkable fortitude." I managed a tired smile. "Necessity is driving me at the moment. Ask me again when the adrenaline wears off." "That's just it," he said thoughtfully. "What you're displaying isn't just adrenaline-fueled reaction. It's strategic resilience. Many people would collapse under the dual burden of cancer treatment and marital betrayal. You've transformed it into focused action." After he left, I returned to the sunroom, watching as evening shadows lengthened across the neglected garden. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more strategic planning, more careful reconstruction of my financial security. The fatigue of my illness would undoubtedly return as today's surge of purposeful energy receded. But something fundamental had shifted. For months, cancer had defined my existence, narrowing my focus to treatment protocols, side effect management, and survival statistics. Michael's betrayal, perversely, had expanded my perspective beyond illness. It had reminded me of my capabilities beyond being a patient. I opened my journal again and wrote, "Michael believed cancer had diminished me to my weakest state. Instead, it revealed my fundamental strength. In trying to take what was mine, he has reminded me of who I am." By the third day, my body reminded me forcefully that strategic determination couldn't overrule the physical realities of cancer treatment. I woke to the familiar nausea and bone-deep fatigue that typically followed my chemotherapy cycles. The burst of energy that had carried me through the initial shock and planning had receded, leaving me physically vulnerable once again. I reached for the anti-nausea medication on my nightstand, swallowing it with the lukewarm water left from the night before. The house was silent save for the gentle hum of the air conditioning system. That silence, once a reminder of Michael's absence, now felt like a protective cocoon within which I could rebuild my strength and reclaim my life. My phone chimed with a message from Anthony. "Documents filed. Meeting with Judge Peterson at 2 p.m. Can you attend via video if needed?" I typed a quick affirmative response, then forced myself to sit up slowly. The room tilted momentarily before steadying. These physical limitations were frustrating, but I had learned through my treatment that acknowledging them was not the same as surrendering to them. I could work with and around my body's current constraints. After a light breakfast of toast and ginger tea, all my stomach could handle, I settled in the home office with my laptop. Today's objective: identifying and mobilizing every resource available to me, both for the immediate financial battlefield and for the longer-term reconstruction of my life. The first category in my resource inventory was financial. Beyond the statutory emergency measures Anthony and I had implemented, I needed a comprehensive understanding of every asset I could legitimately claim or leverage. I created a spreadsheet detailing accessible accounts, retirement funds, stock options from my executive compensation package, and potential liquidation values of personal property. The resulting figure was reassuring but sobering. I had sufficient resources to maintain my treatment schedule and basic living expenses for approximately 18 months without additional income. Beyond that, my financial security would depend on either returning to work full-time or securing a favorable divorce settlement. The second category was professional. My position as CFO was secure. The hospital board had been exceptionally supportive following my diagnosis. But my medical leave was scheduled to last through the completion of my treatment, with a gradual return to work beginning in roughly 4 months. I needed to consider whether accelerating that timeline was medically feasible. I placed a call to Janet. The board meeting went well, she reported after our initial greetings. I presented the quarterly financials with the adjusted projections you prepared before your leave. The executive committee specifically mentioned their appreciation for your foresight. Thank you for handling that, I said. Janet, I need to discuss something with you confidentially. How feasible would it be for me to begin limited remote work next month? Catherine, concern edged her voice. Your medical leave is fully approved through December. There's absolutely no pressure for you to return early. This isn't about pressure, I clarified. It's about maintaining my professional engagement and, frankly, my sense of purpose during treatment. Perhaps 10 hours weekly, focused on strategic planning rather than day-to-day operations. The line went quiet for a moment. This is about what's happening with Michael, isn't it? Partially, I admitted. But it's also about reclaiming aspects of my identity beyond being a cancer patient. The hospital has been my professional home for 15 years. That connection matters to me now more than ever. I understand, Janet said finally. Let me speak with Dr. Torres in HR. We could structure a limited consulting arrangement that wouldn't jeopardize your medical leave status. But Catherine, this has to be contingent on your oncologist's approval. Agreed, I said. I'll discuss it with Dr. Ellis next week. The third resource category was medical. I reviewed my treatment calendar, noting the scheduled appointments and anticipated side effect patterns. The immunotherapy phase would begin in 3 weeks, bringing different challenges than chemotherapy, but potentially fewer debilitating side effects. If the projected response curve held, I could expect gradually increasing energy levels over the coming months, valuable intelligence for planning both my professional re-engagement and the divorce proceedings. The fourth category was personal support. This required the most difficult assessment. For years, my identity had been thoroughly intertwined with Michael's. We shared friends, community connections, and social circles. Many of these relationships would inevitably fracture in the aftermath of our separation. I needed to identify which connections were truly mine, independent of my role as Michael's wife. I began a careful inventory, starting with my sister Elizabeth in Seattle. Our relationship had always been close, though the geographical distance limited our in-person interaction. She had offered repeatedly to come stay with me during treatment, offers I had declined believing Michael would provide necessary support. That calculation had clearly been flawed. My finger hovered over her contact information for several moments before I made the call. Kath? She answered immediately, the 3-hour time difference meaning she was likely just starting her workday. Is everything okay? Are you at the hospital? The concern in her voice nearly cracked my composure. Throughout my treatment, I had maintained a carefully controlled narrative with my family, emphasizing positive developments and minimizing challenges. That approach had protected me from having to process others' emotions alongside my own, but it had also isolated me from potential support. I'm at home, I assured her. Physically, I'm stable. But Liz, something's happened that I need to share with you. The story emerged in methodical detail. Michael's affair, the stolen insurance, funds, his current absence in Bali, and my ongoing legal countermeasures. Once started, I found I couldn't apply the same emotional restraint that had characterized my conversations with Anthony and Janet. With Elizabeth, the clinical facts gave way to the raw truth of betrayal experienced while at my most vulnerable. That absolute bastard! Elizabeth's voice shook with anger when I finished. I'm booking a flight right now. I can be there by tomorrow evening. Liz, you don't need to— Stop, she interrupted firmly. You've been handling cancer and now this betrayal without proper support for too long. I'm coming, and I won't take no for an answer this time. I felt an unexpected wave of relief. Okay. Okay? Just like that? The surprise in her voice almost made me smile. Just like that, I confirmed. I've been reassessing many things, including my reluctance to accept help. It turns out maintaining complete independence isn't actually the optimal strategy in all circumstances. Well, mark this day in history, Elizabeth said, her tone softening. Catherine Harrington acknowledges that even she can't do everything alone. Apparently, cancer and betrayal provide valuable perspective, I replied, surprising myself with the dark humor. After finalizing plans for Elizabeth's arrival, I continued my resource inventory. Beyond family, I identified 3 close friends who were primarily my connections, rather than shared social acquaintances. Diane, my former college roommate who now practiced oncology in Boston. Rebecca, who had worked with me at my previous hospital before relocating to Chicago. And Thomas, a widower whose wife had been my mentor early in my career. I sent each a carefully worded message explaining that Michael and I were separating under difficult circumstances, and that I would value their support in the coming weeks. I included no accusatory details about Michael's behavior, nothing that could be interpreted as attempting to turn them against him. The strength of my position didn't require character assassination. The 5th and final category was psychological resources. This required the most honest self-assessment. What internal strengths could I draw upon during this dual battle against cancer and betrayal? What vulnerabilities needed accommodation and support? My professional training had equipped me with analytical skills, strategic thinking, and calm crisis management, all valuable assets in the current situation. My healthcare background gave me distinct advantages in navigating treatment complexities and communicating effectively with medical providers. But I also recognized limitations that needed addressing. My tendency toward self-reliance had delayed my reaching out for crucial support. My preference for emotional containment, while useful in professional contexts, had potentially isolated me from comforting connections. My identity had become overly defined by professional achievement and marital status, creating vulnerability when both were simultaneously threatened. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Resources aren't just things you have, they're also things you develop." Every capability I've built over my career prepares me for this moment. Every relationship I've nurtured represents potential support. The question isn't just what resources I possess, but how effectively I mobilize and deploy them. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reflection. Through the security camera, I recognized Sandra Peterson, my neighbor from 3 houses down. She stood on the porch holding what appeared to be a casserole dish, her expression concerned. I hesitated momentarily. Sandra and her husband were primarily Michael's friends. They played golf together monthly at the country club. Her appearance likely meant word of our situation had begun circulating. Michael's absence might have been noticed, questions asked. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. "Catherine," Sandra's expression brightened, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I made too much chicken divan and thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal. I know how difficult it can be to maintain proper nutrition during treatment." "That's very thoughtful," I said, accepting the dish. "Would you like to come in for tea?" The invitation surprised us both. Under normal circumstances, I would have politely thanked her and ended the interaction quickly to conserve energy. But my resource assessment had highlighted the value of community connections, even unexpected ones. As we settled in the kitchen with tea, Sandra hesitated before speaking. "Catherine, I hope you don't mind my saying, but several of us in the neighborhood have been concerned. Michael's car has been gone for days, and given your health situation, an opportunity presented itself, not for vengeance or gossip, but for reclaiming my narrative within our community. Michael and I are navigating some significant challenges, I said carefully. He's currently traveling, and I expect we'll be making changes to our living arrangements soon. I appreciate your concern and your kindness in checking on me. Sandra processed this information, clearly recognizing the subtext. Is there anything you need? Anything at all? Actually, I said, making a decision that aligned with my new resource strategy. I could use some help with the garden. My sister is arriving tomorrow to stay for a while, but neither of us has the expertise to address how overgrown everything has become. Say no more, Sandra smiled warmly. My son's landscaping company can send a crew tomorrow. Consider it done. After Sandra left, I returned to my resource inventory with a new category added: community connections. In focusing so intensely on the high-stakes legal and financial maneuvers, I had nearly overlooked the value of everyday support networks. That could make the challenging months ahead more manageable. My phone chimed with a message from Anthony confirming that the emergency injunction had been granted by Judge Peterson, legally preventing Michael from accessing our remaining joint accounts pending further court proceedings. I added this significant development to my growing resource inventory. Each element, financial, professional, medical, personal, psychological, and now community and legal, represented not just assets to be deployed, but foundations upon which to rebuild. The cancer had taken much from me. Michael had attempted to take more. But with each resource identified and mobilized, I reclaimed something essential: agency in determining my own future, regardless of the challenges before me. Elizabeth arrived the following evening, her practical energy filling the house like a fresh breeze. She swept in with 2 suitcases and a determination that bulldozed through my remaining hesitations about accepting help. The guest room is made up, I began as she entered, but she shook her head. I'll take the room next to yours, she said decisively. I need to be able to hear if you need anything during the night. Liz, I'm not an invalid. No. You're a cancer patient who's just discovered her husband is a lying thief, she interrupted, setting down her bags. There's a difference. Now, where's your kitchen? I brought supplements my colleague at the naturopathic clinic recommended for chemo recovery. I followed her, recognizing the futility of argument. Elizabeth had always been like this, direct, practical, and unstoppable once she'd identified a course of action. As a naturopathic physician specializing in supportive care for cancer patients, she brought both professional knowledge and sisterly concern to my situation. I've established a temporary command center in the home office, I explained as she unpacked an impressive array of tinctures and powders. Anthony, my attorney, will be here tomorrow morning to continue developing our strategy. Elizabeth paused, giving me an evaluative look. And how are you really doing? Not the version you'd give colleagues or doctors, but the actual truth. The question punctured the practiced composure I'd maintained. I searched for the right word. I'm recalibrating. Every assumption about my life, my marriage, my future, everything requires adjustment. She nodded, accepting this assessment. Recalibration is an active process. That's good. She began organizing the supplements into morning and evening doses. Have you eaten today? The question revealed how thoroughly my normal routines had collapsed. I had toast this morning. Sit, she instructed, opening the refrigerator to survey its meager contents. We'll get groceries delivered tomorrow. For tonight, I'm making you a protein-rich smoothie and bone broth. Your body needs resources for this fight. As Elizabeth prepared food, I found myself observing her with new appreciation. Throughout our lives, I had been the organized, strategic sister while Elizabeth followed a more intuitive, holistic path. I had sometimes privately considered her approach less rigorous than my evidence-based frameworks. Now, I recognized the wisdom in her integrated perspective. She understood that physical resilience, emotional processing, and strategic action were interconnected necessities, not separate domains. After ensuring I consumed adequate nutrition, Elizabeth joined me in reviewing the comprehensive strategy document I'd been developing. We sat in the office, now transformed by color-coded files, legal documents, and a large whiteboard outlined, with action items and timelines. "This is impressive," she acknowledged, scanning the materials. "But Catherine, where's the section for your recovery and healing? I see financial strategies, legal maneuvers, professional considerations, but nothing specifically addressing your physical and emotional restoration." Her observation stopped me short. "That's covered under the medical treatment calendar," I said, pointing to the schedule on the wall. "Treatment isn't the same as healing," Elizabeth countered gently. "Treatment is what's done to you. Healing is what you do for yourself. Where's your blueprint for rebuilding your strength, processing this betrayal, and creating a vision for your life beyond both cancer and Michael?" I stared at the whiteboard, suddenly seeing the gap in my meticulous planning. I had approached my situation as primarily a logistical and legal challenge, focusing on external actions while neglecting the internal transformations needed to truly reclaim my life. "I don't know how to plan for that," I admitted quietly. Elizabeth smiled, reaching for a marker. "Then let's start now. This deserves its own section." She wrote "Transformation Blueprint" in bold letters on a clear section of the whiteboard. "This isn't secondary to your other strategies. It's the foundation that makes them sustainable." For the next 2 hours, we developed a parallel track of initiatives focused explicitly on my holistic recovery. Elizabeth contributed her professional expertise while respecting my need for measurable objectives and clear metrics, meeting me where my analytical mind required structure. We created a nutrition strategy tailored to counteract treatment side effects while rebuilding my immune function. We established a modified movement plan that acknowledged my current energy limitations while gradually rebuilding strength. We identified evidence-based approaches to processing trauma and grief, including both professional therapy and daily reflective practices. Most significantly, we designated time for what Elizabeth called future visioning, structured reflection, on what I wanted my life to look like beyond the immediate crisis. "The greatest risk," Elizabeth explained as we worked, "is that you'll define your recovery as simply getting through cancer and divorce. That's a survival mindset, not a transformation mindset. You need to be as strategic about creating your future as you are about protecting your assets." By midnight, the transformation blueprint had evolved into a comprehensive plan integrating physical restoration, emotional processing, and identity reclamation. Looking at it alongside my other strategies, I felt something shift in my understanding of the challenge before me. This wasn't merely about outmaneuvering Michael or enduring cancer. It was about emerging from these dual crises as a more fully realized version of myself. "This is excellent work," I acknowledged, exhaustion finally catching up with me. "Thank you, Liz." "You're welcome," she said, capping the marker. "Now, bed. Your body needs rest to implement any of these plans." The next morning, Anthony arrived, promptly at 9, his professional demeanor slightly disconcerted by Elizabeth's presence at the strategy table. He quickly adjusted, however, when she demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how physiological recovery would impact legal proceedings. "We've been granted the emergency injunction freezing the joint accounts," Anthony confirmed, spreading documents across the table. "But that's just the first step. We need to discuss how aggressive you want to be in the overall approach." "Explain my options," I requested. "Option 1 is primarily defensive. Secure your medical funds, establish separate finances, and negotiate a settlement that provides for your needs during recovery and beyond. This approach minimizes conflict and public exposure." He paused, gauging my reaction before continuing. "Option 2 is more assertive. We pursue full financial disclosure, investigate potential hidden assets, and position for a larger settlement. Based on Michael's breach of fiduciary duty to you during your illness, this likely results in a more favorable financial outcome, but involves more stress and potential public scrutiny. And option 3? I prompted, recognizing his hesitation. Option 3 is what I'd classify as maximum accountability. We pursue everything in option 2, plus we file complaints with relevant professional boards regarding the misappropriation of medical funds, potentially triggering investigations into his business practices. This approach would likely devastate Michael's professional reputation and business relationships. I considered these options carefully, aware of Elizabeth watching me with concern. The vengeful path held undeniable emotional appeal. Michael had calculated that my illness would make me vulnerable and passive. Demonstrating the catastrophic error of that assessment would be satisfying. Yet vengeance wasn't the objective I had outlined in my transformation blueprint. My goal was reclamation and renewal, not retribution. I want to pursue option 2, I decided. I need financial security and appropriate compensation for Michael's breach of duty, but destroying him professionally doesn't serve my recovery. I need energy focused on healing, not extended conflict. Anthony nodded, making notes. A balanced approach. We'll need a complete financial disclosure, including subpoenas for his business records if necessary. I can help with that, I said, retrieving a flash drive from my desk. These are copies of Michael's quarterly business reports for the past 5 years. He always had me review them before submission to his investors. A second set of financial eyes. I maintained copies as reference for our tax preparations. Anthony's eyebrows raised as he accepted the drive. This will be extremely helpful. Elizabeth smiled approvingly. Catherine's always been thorough. There's more, I continued. I've compiled a timeline correlating Michael's business trips, credit card charges, and significant withdrawals over the past 18 months, the period since he hired Vanessa. The pattern suggests he's been supporting a dual lifestyle for some time, not just during this Bali trip. Anthony reviewed the documentation with professional appreciation. This level of financial documentation gives us exceptional leverage. Most clients struggle to produce basic account statements. Most clients aren't CFOs, Elizabeth noted with sisterly pride. We spent the next 3 hours refining the strategy, integrating it with my transformation blueprint to ensure all legal proceedings aligned with my physical recovery timeline. Anthony recommended filing the divorce petition immediately, while Michael remained abroad and unaware of my discoveries. The element of surprise gives us significant advantage, he explained. Once served, Michael will be legally restricted from disposing of major assets or making significant financial changes without court approval. When will he be served? I asked, mentally calculating the implications. We can have the papers waiting when he returns from Bali, Anthony confirmed. Given the financial evidence and the circumstances of your illness, we have grounds to request an expedited hearing for temporary support and medical expense coverage. As Anthony gathered his materials to leave, he paused. Catherine, I've handled many high-conflict divorces involving substantial assets. Your situation is challenging, particularly given your health considerations, but your strategic approach gives us exceptional positioning. Just remember that legal proceedings can become emotionally draining even when you hold the stronger position. That's why we've developed this, Elizabeth interjected, indicating the transformation blueprint on the whiteboard. The legal strategy doesn't exist in isolation. It's one component of Catherine's overall recovery plan. Anthony studied the blueprint with newfound respect. Impressive. Most clients focus exclusively on the legal battle at the expense of their well-being. This integrated approach is much wiser. After Anthony left, Elizabeth and I shared a quiet lunch on the patio, watching as the landscaping crew Sandra had arranged transformed the neglected garden. The symbolic parallel wasn't lost on me. Strategic intervention bringing order to what had become overgrown and unmanageable. You know what strikes me about your approach? Elizabeth commented as we observed the work. You're not just reacting to Michael's betrayal, you're using it as a catalyst for comprehensive evaluation and redesign. Most people in your situation would be primarily focused on punishing their spouse or merely surviving until the crisis passes. I considered this assessment. I suppose my professional training influences my perspective. In healthcare finance, crisis always presents opportunity for systemic improvement. You don't just patch the immediate problem, you examine why it occurred and redesign to prevent recurrence. And what systemic improvements are you designing for your life? She asked. The question resonated deeply. What fundamental redesign did I want to implement beyond the immediate crisis response? Independence with meaningful connection, I answered after reflection. My marriage to Michael created financial entanglement without true emotional intimacy. My career provided purpose, but consumed energy that should have been invested in deeper relationships. Moving forward, I want financial sovereignty alongside authentic connections, relationships based on mutual support rather than dependency or obligation. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. That's a transformation vision worth building toward, and it starts now, not after cancer treatment or divorce proceedings conclude. As the afternoon progressed, I updated my transformation blueprint with this clarified vision, recognizing how it would influence decisions across all domains: legal, financial, professional, and personal. This wasn't merely a crisis response strategy, but the architectural plan for reconstructing my life according to more authentic specifications. For the first time since my diagnosis, I found myself contemplating the future with something beyond grim determination. There was a spark of genuine anticipation, not for the challenges ahead, which remained daunting, but for the opportunity to create a life more aligned with my authentic values than what had existed before. Michael had calculated that cancer would render me vulnerable to his betrayal. Instead, it had stripped away pretenses and compromises I might otherwise have maintained indefinitely. The painful clarity of my situation had become, paradoxically, the foundation for profound transformation. 8 days into Michael's Bali getaway, I faced my first significant decision point. Anthony called early in the morning, his normally measured tone carrying an unusual urgency. "Catherine, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," he began. "Michael has attempted to remotely access the equity line of credit on the house. The bank flagged it based on our injunction, but he's disputing the freeze, claiming medical emergency." I sat straighter in my chair, fully alert despite the lingering fatigue from yesterday's medical appointment. "What kind of medical emergency?" "He's claiming Vanessa contracted a severe infection requiring hospitalization in Bali. He's attempting to withdraw $45,000 for what he describes as life-saving treatment not covered by travel insurance." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had stolen funds intended for my cancer treatment now sought access to our joint assets for his mistress's medical care. "What are our options?" I asked, already moving to my office where all the financial documentation was organized. "The bank has placed a 24-hour hold on the request pending legal clarification. As your counsel, I need your decision on how to proceed. We can maintain the complete freeze based on the injunction, or we can propose a modified arrangement allowing partial access with specific conditions." This moment crystallized the difference between reaction and strategy. My immediate emotional response was clear: absolute denial. Let Michael experience the consequences of his choices. Let him feel a fraction of the vulnerability I'd faced when discovering he'd emptied the account containing my treatment funds. Yet my transformation blueprint called for decisions aligned with my values, not just responsive to Michael's actions. This situation offered the first real test of that commitment. "I need a moment to consider this," I told Anthony. "Can I call you back in 15 minutes? "Of course. The bank needs our response by noon." After ending the call, I found Elizabeth. in the kitchen preparing an herbal infusion designed to support my immune system. Michael's mistress is apparently hospitalized in Bali, I explained, summarizing the situation. He's trying to access our home equity line for her treatment costs. Elizabeth's expression darkened. The audacity is breathtaking. Yes, I agreed. But this isn't about his character. It's about mine. What action aligns with who I am and who I'm becoming through this process? The transformation blueprint on my office whiteboard included a section titled Core Values that Elizabeth had insisted I define explicitly. At the top of that list, compassion without exploitation, strength without cruelty, integrity even when unwitnessed. I returned to my office and called Anthony back. This isn't about dwelling in negative feelings, but about developing greater emotional fluency alongside your already established strategic fluency. After the session, I added this practice to my blueprint, labeling it emotional integration. The analytical part of me immediately wanted to create metrics for measuring progress in this domain, but I recognized the irony in that impulse and simply left the practice defined but unmeasured for now. Elizabeth respected my need for privacy, following the therapy session, focusing instead on preparing nutrient-dense meals designed to support my recovery from the previous day's medical treatments. By late afternoon, my energy had improved enough to review the detailed financial reports Anthony had sent over based on the records I had provided. Michael appears to have been systematically increasing his separate assets for approximately 14 months, I explained to Elizabeth as we reviewed the documents together. The timing correlates almost exactly with Vanessa's hiring date. Suggesting he's been planning this exit for over a year, Elizabeth observed. Yes, but not always competently. He made several tactical errors that significantly strengthen our position. Chief among these errors was Michael's failure to recognize that my professional expertise gave me unusual insight into financial maneuvering. He had attempted to obscure asset transfers through multiple accounts, apparently unaware that these patterns were precisely the kind of irregularities I was trained to identify in healthcare finance compliance reviews. His biggest mistake was underestimating you, Elizabeth remarked, echoing my thoughts. That's been a consistent theme, I agreed. But there's something important in that observation beyond just Michael's misjudgment. I've been thinking about Dr. Powell's comments regarding emotional processing. What connection do you see? Perhaps I've underestimated myself in certain ways, just as Michael did. I've defined my strength primarily through strategic thinking and problem-solving, potentially neglecting other forms of resilience. My transformation blueprint needs to encompass rediscovering capacities I've overlooked or undervalued. The remainder of the afternoon was dedicated to this expanded self-assessment. Rather than focusing exclusively on the strategic actions needed to secure my financial position, I began cataloging the broader personal resources I could reclaim and develop during this challenging period. I identified my capacity for deep appreciation, a quality that had become muted during the later years of my marriage but remained evident in how I responded to natural beauty, artistic expression, and moments of genuine connection. I noted my underlying creativity, once channeled primarily into complex financial modeling, but potentially applicable to reimagining my life beyond current constraints. Most significantly, I recognized a capacity for genuine compassion that extended beyond concept to action, as demonstrated in my decision regarding Michael's request for medical funds. This wasn't merely strategic positioning, but reflected a core aspect of my character that remained intact despite betrayal. By evening, my energy reserves were depleted, a common pattern following treatment days. Elizabeth had prepared a simple but nourishing dinner, and as we ate, she shared updates from her clinical practice and stories about her recent hiking adventures in the Pacific Northwest. The normalcy of this conversation provided welcome respite from the intensity of legal strategies and medical concerns. After dinner, I received an email notification from the bank confirming the conditional release of funds directly to the medical facility in Bali, where Vanessa was apparently being treated. Attached was a formal acknowledgement from Michael accepting all stipulated conditions, including the classification of these funds as an advance against his portion of the eventual asset division. His accompanying message was brief. "Thank you for this consideration despite our circumstances. Vanessa's condition has stabilized with appropriate treatment. No apology. No recognition of the profound irony in his seeking medical funds after stealing mine. Just acknowledgement of the practical arrangement and minimal courtesy." I forwarded the communication to Anthony for documentation purposes, then closed my laptop. Whatever emotions Michael's message might have triggered, anger, vindication, or perhaps just weary resignation, would be addressed during tomorrow's emotional integration practice. For now, I had taken my first bold action in accordance with my transformation blueprint, rather than simply reacting to Michael's betrayal. This was no small achievement. I had demonstrated to myself that even amid cancer treatment and marital dissolution, I could act from a place of conscious choice rather than conditioned response or emotional reaction. This isn't about dwelling in negative feelings, but about developing greater emotional fluency alongside your already established strategic fluency. After the session, I added this practice to my blueprint, labeling it emotional integration. The analytical part of me immediately wanted to create metrics for measuring progress in this domain, but I recognized the irony in that impulse and simply left the practice defined but unmeasured for now. Elizabeth respected my need for privacy, following the therapy session, focusing instead on preparing nutrient-dense meals designed to support my recovery from the previous day's medical treatments. By late afternoon, my energy had improved enough to review the detailed financial reports Anthony had sent over based on the records I had provided. Michael appears to have been systematically increasing his separate assets for approximately 14 months, I explained to Elizabeth as we reviewed the documents together. The timing correlates almost exactly with Vanessa's hiring date. Suggesting he's been planning this exit for over a year, Elizabeth observed. Yes, but not always competently. He made several tactical errors that significantly strengthen our position. Chief among these errors was Michael's failure to recognize that my professional expertise gave me unusual insight into financial maneuvering. He had attempted to obscure asset transfers through multiple accounts, apparently unaware that these patterns were precisely the kind of irregularities I was trained to identify in healthcare finance compliance reviews. "His biggest mistake was underestimating you," Elizabeth remarked, echoing my thoughts. "That's been a consistent theme," I agreed. "But there's something important in that observation beyond just Michael's misjudgment. I've been thinking about Dr. Powell's comments regarding emotional processing. What connection do you see? Perhaps I've underestimated myself in certain ways, just as Michael did. I've defined my strength primarily through strategic thinking and problem solving, potentially neglecting other forms of resilience. My transformation blueprint needs to encompass rediscovering capacities I've overlooked or undervalued." The remainder of the afternoon was dedicated to this expanded self-assessment. Rather than focusing exclusively on the strategic actions needed to secure my financial position, I began cataloging the broader personal resources I could reclaim and develop during this challenging period. I identified my capacity for deep appreciation, a quality that had become muted during the later years of my marriage, but remained evident in how I responded to natural beauty, artistic expression, and moments of genuine connection. I noted my underlying creativity, once channeled primarily into complex financial modeling, but potentially applicable to reimagining my life beyond current constraints. Most significantly, I recognized a capacity for genuine compassion that extended beyond concept to action, as demonstrated in my decision regarding Michael's request for medical funds. This wasn't merely strategic positioning, but reflected a core aspect of my character that remained intact despite betrayal. By evening, my energy reserves were depleted, a common pattern following treatment days. Elizabeth had prepared a simple but nourishing dinner, and as we ate, she shared updates from her clinical practice and stories about her recent hiking adventures in the Pacific Northwest. The normalcy of this conversation provided welcome respite from the intensity of legal strategies and medical concerns. After dinner, I received an email notification from the bank, confirming the conditional release of funds directly to the medical facility in Bali, where Vanessa was apparently being treated. Attached was a formal acknowledgement from Michael accepting all stipulated conditions, including the classification of these funds as an advance against his portion of the eventual asset division. His accompanying message was brief. "Thank you for this consideration despite our circumstances. Vanessa's condition has stabilized with appropriate treatment." No apology. No recognition of the profound irony in his seeking medical funds after stealing mine. Just acknowledgement of the practical arrangement and minimal courtesy. I forwarded the communication to Anthony for documentation purposes, then closed my laptop. Whatever emotions Michael's message might have triggered, anger, vindication, or perhaps just weary resignation, would be addressed during tomorrow's emotional integration practice. For now, I had taken my first bold action in accordance with my transformation blueprint, rather than simply reacting to Michael's betrayal. This was no small achievement. I had demonstrated to myself that even amid cancer treatment and marital dissolution, I could act from a place of conscious choice rather than conditioned response or emotional reaction. The path ahead remained daunting, but this evidence of my capacity for aligned action reinforced my confidence in navigating it. "Small victory?" Elizabeth asked, noting my expression as I closed the laptop. "Meaningful one," I corrected. "I made a decision based on who I'm becoming rather than in reaction to what's been done to me. That feels like significant progress." "It is," she confirmed. "That's the difference between merely surviving challenges and using them as catalysts for transformation." As I prepared for sleep that night, I updated my journal with a brief reflection. Today, I chose compassion without exploitation and strength without cruelty. The decision was neither naive forgiveness nor tactical positioning, but aligned action, reflecting my core values. In this small but significant way, I've begun reclaiming authorship of my life story from those who presumed to write it for me. The morning Michael was scheduled to return from Bali, my carefully constructed plans encountered their first significant complication. I woke early, reviewing my preparation checklist for what promised to be a pivotal day. Anthony would arrive at 9 with the process server. The locks had been changed as legally permitted under the emergency order, and Elizabeth had arranged to be present for moral support while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid direct involvement in the confrontation. Everything was methodically organized, until my phone rang at 6:42 a.m. "Catherine, it's Dr. Ellis." My oncologist rarely called personally, especially at this hour. "I've been reviewing your latest blood work, and I'm concerned about your neutrophil counts. They're significantly lower than our threshold for proceeding with treatment." I sat up slowly, processing this information. "How significantly?" "Enough that I want to postpone tomorrow's immunotherapy initiation and admit you today for monitoring and preventive antibiotics. With your neutrophils this low, you're at high risk for infection." The timing couldn't have been worse. After weeks of strategic preparation, I would be hospitalized on the exact day Michael returned to discover his access revoked and divorce papers waiting. While the practical arrangements would proceed without my presence, this medical complication threatened to undermine the psychological advantage I had carefully cultivated. "I understand the medical necessity," I said carefully, "but today presents unique challenges regarding my personal situation. Could we potentially begin antibiotics? Outpatient with daily monitoring?" Dr. Ellis's tone remained gentle but firm. "Catherine, I appreciate your circumstances, but my primary concern must be your safety. Neutropenic fever can escalate from initial symptoms to life-threatening sepsis within hours. This isn't something we can manage with outpatient protocols. The rational part of my mind recognized she was absolutely correct. The strategic part calculated rapidly adjusting plans to accommodate this development. The newly acknowledged emotional part experienced a complex mixture of disappointment, frustration, and a touch of fear regarding both the medical concerns and the disruption to carefully laid plans. "I'll need an hour to make arrangements before coming in," I said finally. "I'll have a bed ready in the oncology unit. Catherine," she added, her voice softening, "I know this is extraordinarily poor timing given what you've shared about your home situation. But addressing this aggressively now means protecting your ability to continue treatment without major delays." After ending the call, I found Elizabeth already awake and preparing breakfast. Her expression shifted immediately upon seeing my face. "What's happened?" I explained the situation, watching her shift seamlessly from sister to medical professional as she processed the implications. "Dr. Ellis is right. Neutropenic precautions are non-negotiable," she confirmed. "But this doesn't derail your overall strategy. It just changes the immediate implementation." She was already reaching for her phone. "I'll call Anthony while you pack essentials for the hospital. We'll adapt the plan to account for your absence." The next hour passed in a blur of efficient activity. Elizabeth communicated with Anthony, who adjusted the timing for the process server to arrive after I had safely departed for the hospital. I packed a carefully considered hospital bag, ensuring I had both practical necessities and meaningful comforts for what might be several days of confinement. Most importantly, I prepared a detailed document for Anthony outlining potential scenarios and my preferred responses to each. This wasn't merely contingency planning, but a way of maintaining agency despite my physical absence during this critical juncture. As Elizabeth drove me to the hospital, I found myself struggling with an unexpected emotion, shame. Not about the medical necessity. I understood the random cruelty of cancer and its treatments too well to internalize responsibility for my dropping blood counts. Rather, I felt shame about my perceived retreat at this pivotal moment. "I should be there," I said quietly as we approached the hospital, facing him directly instead of hiding behind legal representatives. Elizabeth glanced at me sharply. "First, you're not hiding. You're receiving necessary medical care. Second, there's no should about confronting someone who betrayed you during your most vulnerable time. And third," her voice softened, "sometimes the most powerful position isn't standing directly in the storm, but strategically directing resources from a protected vantage point." Her reframing helped, though it didn't entirely dispel my frustration. As we pulled into the hospital parking structure, I made one final call to Anthony, confirming arrangements and emphasizing key points about the financial documentation he should have immediately accessible. "Catherine," he said before we disconnected, "this development doesn't weaken our position. In many ways, it strengthens the narrative of Michael's abandonment during your illness. Focus on your medical needs, and let my team handle today's proceedings." The admission process was efficient, thanks to my status as both a patient and executive at the hospital. By 9:30, I was settled in a private room in the oncology unit, an IV delivering preventive antibiotics and monitoring equipment, tracking my vital signs. The familiar hospital environment, typically a place where I moved with professional authority, felt strangely disempowering from this side of the care equation. Elizabeth arranged the room with small touches to make it more personal, placing family photos on the bedside table, setting up my laptop within easy reach, and hanging a small tapestry she had brought from home to soften the institutional atmosphere. "Command Center 2.0, she announced with forced cheerfulness. "Actually better than your home office. 24-hour nursing staff, room service, and no chance of unwanted visitors." I managed a smile at her attempt to normalize the situation. "Have you heard from Anthony?" "He texted a few minutes ago. The process server is in position. They're expecting Michael's flight to land at 11:15. I nodded, trying to visualize the scene that would unfold at the house. Michael arriving, perhaps still basking in post-vacation satisfaction, only to find his key no longer worked. The process server waiting to deliver papers documenting not just my knowledge of his betrayal, but my comprehensive countermeasures. The realization that his carefully constructed exit strategy had catastrophically backfired. The scenario had played repeatedly in my mind during the weeks of preparation, a moment of justice I had anticipated witnessing firsthand. Now I would receive only second-hand accounts, my direct experience limited to this sterile hospital room. Dr. Ellis arrived to review my treatment plan, her professionalism tempered with genuine concern. Your white count is concerning but not yet critical. We're being aggressively proactive to prevent infection while your immune system is compromised. How long should I expect to be here? I asked, thinking of the cascade of carefully scheduled legal and financial proceedings that would need adjustment. Best case scenario, 3 to 4 days if your counts begin recovering and you remain fever-free, she replied. But Catherine, I need to be transparent. There's a possibility we may need to delay the immunotherapy start date depending on how your body responds. This could adjust your overall treatment timeline. This possibility hadn't factored into my strategic planning. All my carefully constructed timelines for legal proceedings, financial arrangements, and professional re-engagement had been built around the treatment schedule projected by my medical team. A significant delay would require comprehensive recalibration across multiple domains. After Dr. Ellis departed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, processing this additional layer of uncertainty. Elizabeth had stepped out to retrieve items from the car, leaving me momentarily alone with thoughts that refused neat categorization into my usual organizational frameworks. The emotional integration practice Dr. Powell had recommended seemed particularly relevant now. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to identify and acknowledge the emotions coursing through me without immediately channeling them into problem-solving mode. Frustration at the disruption to carefully laid plans, disappointment at missing the culmination of weeks of strategic preparation, lingering anger toward Michael, fear about the medical implications of my dropping blood counts. And beneath these more accessible emotions, a deeper current of grief, not just for the marriage I had lost, but for the predictable future I had once assumed would unfold according to expected parameters. Rather than immediately developing contingency plans for each of these concerns, I simply allowed myself to experience them fully. This practice didn't come naturally. My instinct remained problem-solving rather than presence with discomfort. But I recognized its value in my broader healing process. My phone chimed with a message from Anthony. Proceedings underway as planned. Will update when complete. The stark simplicity of this communication contrasted sharply with the complex emotions it triggered. Somewhere across town, a pivotal confrontation was occurring that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of my life. And I was watching it unfold through brief text messages while tethered to an IV pole. Elizabeth returned carrying additional comforts from home. My favorite robe, proper tea instead of the hospital's inferior offerings, and several books she thought might provide mental engagement without excessive strain. Any updates? She asked, arranging these items thoughtfully around the room. Just confirmation that the process is underway, I replied. Elizabeth, I need to revise significant portions of our strategy if my treatment timeline changes substantially. She paused in her arrangements, studying me with the perceptive gaze that had always seen through my carefully maintained composure. That's true, but perhaps not in this exact moment. Right now, your body needs you to focus on supporting its recovery, not reformulating contingency plans for events weeks away. Her gentle redirection reminded me of a crucial element in my transformation blueprint. Learning to distinguish between necessary strategic thinking and habitual retreating into planning as a way to avoid uncomfortable present realities. You're right, I acknowledged. My immediate priority is supporting my immune system recovery. The strategic adjustments can wait until we have more definitive medical information. Exactly, she smiled approvingly. Though I recognize making that distinction doesn't come easily for you. Recalibration never does, I said, consciously relaxing into the hospital bed, rather than maintaining the alert posture I'd instinctively adopted. But it seems to be the primary lesson of this chapter in my life. Around noon, Anthony called with a detailed account of the morning's events. Michael had indeed returned to find the locks changed, access revoked, and legal documentation waiting. His initial reaction had progressed from confusion to anger to stunned disbelief as he reviewed the comprehensive evidence of both his betrayal and my countermeasures. He initially claimed no knowledge of the insurance fund transfer, Anthony reported. When confronted with the bank records showing his direct authorization, he shifted to claiming it was a temporary measure during his travel. The process server said his demeanor changed dramatically when he realized the extent of financial documentation we've compiled. Did he ask about my whereabouts? I inquired, unsure what answer I was hoping for. Eventually, yes. When informed, "You were hospitalized due to treatment complications." He appeared genuinely surprised. Whether that represents actual concern or realization of how it strengthens our narrative of abandonment during illness is difficult to assess. After reviewing next steps in the legal proceedings, Anthony added, "Catherine, while I understand, today's medical developments were unwelcome from a strategic perspective. They may ultimately strengthen our position. Michael's return from luxury travel to find you hospitalized creates a compelling contrast that even the most unsympathetic judge would find difficult to ignore." After the call ended, I found myself contemplating this perspective. Throughout my career, I had developed expertise in converting apparent setbacks into strategic advantages, identifying opportunities within constraints that might otherwise appear limiting. Perhaps this unexpected hospitalization represented not a retreat from confrontation, but an evolution of strategy. Elizabeth returned from the cafeteria with proper food to supplement the hospital's limited offerings. As we ate, she shared stories about her recent volunteer work with cancer patients in underserved communities, tales of resilience that provided welcome perspective on my current challenges. "The difference I've observed," she reflected, setting aside her empty container, "is that adversity doesn't create character so much as reveal it. Your response to these dual crises isn't forming who you are. It's uncovering who you've always been beneath roles and expectations that may have obscured your essential nature." This observation resonated deeply. Perhaps the transformation I was experiencing wasn't so much becoming someone new as reclaiming aspects of myself that had been incrementally compromised through years of accommodation and adjustment. My phone chimed again, another update from Anthony with unexpected news. "Michael has requested an immediate meeting with you. Claims there are critical matters requiring direct discussion. Strongly advise against any contact without legal representation. Present." This development introduced yet another tactical decision point. The strategic advantages of maintaining complete separation were clear. All communication filtered through legal representatives maintained both emotional distance and procedural protection. Yet a carefully controlled meeting might yield valuable insights into Michael's mental state and potential counter-strategies. As I weighed these considerations, a notification appeared on my hospital room's information screen. "Visitor request, Michael Harrington." He had somehow discovered my location and was currently in the hospital lobby requesting access. The immediate collision of medical vulnerability and legal strategy created a decision point I hadn't anticipated facing from a hospital bed. Elizabeth watched me process this development, her expression concerned but non-directive. "What would serve your overall well-being in this moment?" she asked simply. The question cut through tactical calculations to the core consideration, not what would optimize legal advantage or satisfy emotional impulses, but what would genuinely support my integrated healing process. I reached for my phone to send a clear, boundary-establishing response that would protect both my medical recovery and strategic position while demonstrating the quiet strength that had become central to my transformation blueprint. "Tell him no," I replied, my voice calmer than I expected. "Anthony can inform him that all communication must go through legal channels." Elizabeth nodded approvingly. "I'll call security to ensure they understand you're not accepting visitors," without explicit approval. As she stepped out to make the call, I sent a message to Anthony. "Michael is at the hospital attempting to visit. I've declined. Please reinforce that all communication must proceed through proper legal channels." His response arrived within minutes. "Understood. I'll contact him immediately to reinforce boundaries and protocols." My hospital room's information screen updated. "Visitor request. Declined." A small victory in maintaining appropriate boundaries, yet it triggered complex emotions. For 19 years, Michael had been my default emergency contact, the person hospital staff would automatically notify and admit to my room. Now he stood on the opposite side of deliberately constructed barriers, his access to me as restricted, as his access to our joint financial resources. Elizabeth returned, her expression suggesting the matter had been effectively handled. "Security has been notified. They're very protective of their executive leadership, even when that leadership is temporarily in a hospital gown." I smiled at her attempt to lighten the moment. "Thank you. For everything." "No thanks needed," she replied, arranging herself comfortably in the visitor's chair. "Now, since you're temporarily confined and your strategic timeline needs recalibration, anyway, this might be an excellent opportunity for expanding your perspective beyond immediate tactical concerns." "What did you have in mind?" "In your transformation blueprint, we included purpose exploration as a key component, but it's been continually deprioritized in favor of urgent legal and financial matters." She reached for her tablet. "I've brought some materials that might facilitate that exploration without requiring excessive energy." The materials she had compiled included articles by cancer survivors who had used their experience as catalysts for significant life reinvention, profiles of professionals who had successfully pivoted careers after major life disruptions, and several guided reflection exercises designed specifically for individuals navigating multiple simultaneous transitions. As I began reviewing these resources, Elizabeth added, "The hospital environment creates a unique opportunity for perspective expansion. You're physically removed from both your home with its associations and your office with its responsibilities. This liminal space can facilitate thinking beyond immediate circumstances." She was right. The hospital room, sterile and institutional though it was, offered a neutral environment free from the emotional echoes that permeated both my home and workplace. Here, tethered to medical equipment yet liberated from daily responsibilities, I could engage with larger questions typically overshadowed by immediate concerns. I began with an exercise titled Legacy Reflection, which prompted consideration of what lasting impact I wanted my life and work to create. This question had always seemed premature, something to consider in retirement planning or estate arrangements. Now, with my mortality rendered less theoretical by cancer's intrusion, it carried immediate relevance. What legacy was I creating through my work as a healthcare finance executive? What lasting contribution did I want to make beyond efficient systems and balanced budgets? How might my personal experience as a patient inform my professional approach? When, I returned to leadership? These questions expanded my thinking beyond the immediate battleground of divorce proceedings and cancer treatment to the broader landscape of purpose and meaning. They invited consideration not just of what I was fighting against, but what I was living for. My reflections were interrupted by a gentle knock. A nurse entered to check my vital signs and adjust the antibiotic infusion. "How are you feeling, Dr. Harrington?" she asked, her professional demeanor slightly modified by the knowledge that I was both patient and hospital executive. "Physically stable," I replied truthfully, frustrated by the timing of this setback, but understanding the necessity. She nodded sympathetically while recording my temperature. "Your white count is showing early signs of response to treatment." Dr. Ellis is cautiously optimistic. After completing her assessment, she hesitated momentarily. "Dr. Harrington, I hope you don't mind my mentioning this, but your reforms to the oncology department's financial assistance program made a profound difference for my mother last year. The expanded eligibility criteria meant she could complete her full treatment protocol without depleting her retirement savings." This unexpected connection caught me off guard. The financial assistance expansion had been one of many policy adjustments I'd implemented, important but hardly revolutionary in my estimation. Yet here was evidence of its tangible impact on an individual life, one connected to someone now, providing my care. "I'm glad the program was helpful," I said, genuinely moved by this concrete example of my work's impact. After the nurse departed, I returned to the legacy reflection with fresh perspective. Perhaps my most meaningful contributions weren't the dramatic system overhauls or major financial restructuring that featured prominently in my professional self-concept, but the quieter policy adjustments that directly affected patients' access to care and financial security during illness. Elizabeth, who had discreetly stepped outside during the nurse's visit, returned with 2 cups of proper tea. "You look contemplative." "I'm reconsidering how I measure the value of my professional contributions," I explained, sharing the nurse's story. "For years, I've prioritized large-scale system efficiency and organizational financial stability, necessary foundations, certainly. But perhaps the most meaningful aspects of my work have been the targeted interventions that directly affect patient experience, particularly regarding financial toxicity of treatment." "Financial toxicity, such a clinical term for such a deeply human problem," Elizabeth observed. "Your personal experience certainly provides unique insight into that reality." This observation sparked a cascade of connections. My dual perspective as both healthcare finance executive and cancer patient uniquely positioned me to address one of the most significant challenges in modern oncology: the devastating financial impact of treatment on patients and families, even those with supposedly comprehensive insurance. The very expertise Michael had dismissed as dry and technical, financial systems analysis, policy development, strategic resource allocation, could be leveraged not just for organizational efficiency, but for transformative patient advocacy. My personal experience navigating treatment while simultaneously managing complex financial challenges provided experiential knowledge few in healthcare leadership possessed. This expanded perspective didn't negate the immediate challenges before me: legal proceedings, treatment complications, emotional recovery from betrayal. But it situated these challenges within a larger narrative of purpose and contribution that transcended both cancer and divorce. "I think I've identified a potential direction for professional re-engagement," I told Elizabeth, feeling genuine enthusiasm despite my physical fatigue. "Not just returning to my previous role, but evolving it to more directly address financial toxicity in cancer care, leveraging both my system's expertise and personal experience." "That's perfect," Elizabeth smiled broadly. "It builds on your established professional foundation while incorporating the wisdom gained through personal challenge. And most importantly, it transforms something painful into something purposeful." Our conversation was interrupted by another message notification from Anthony. "Michael has retained counsel, Davis and Winters. Initial communication suggests potential for negotiated settlement rather than protracted litigation. Favorable development." This update further expanded my perspective on the situation. Michael's choice of legal representation, a firm known for expedient settlements rather than aggressive litigation, suggested he recognized the weakness of his position. More importantly, It indicated a potential path toward resolution that wouldn't consume excessive emotional and financial resources during my recovery. Elizabeth read the message over my shoulder. That's encouraging. A negotiated settlement would minimize stress during your treatment. Yes, I agreed. Though, we need to ensure any agreement fully addresses both immediate needs and long-term security. Before we could discuss further, Dr. Ellis arrived for evening rounds, reviewing my chart with cautious optimism. Your numbers are trending in the right direction. If this continues, we might be looking at discharge in 3 days, rather than the longer time frame I initially suggested. And the immunotherapy timeline? I asked, thinking of the cascading adjustments required for any substantial treatment delay. If your counts continue improving at this rate, we might only need to delay initiation by 1 week, rather than postponing indefinitely, she replied. Catherine, I know managing these uncertainties alongside your personal situation is extraordinarily challenging, but your body is showing resilience. That's something to celebrate. After she departed, Elizabeth and I adjusted the whiteboard calendar I'd insisted on having in my hospital room, a simplified version of my comprehensive transformation blueprint. The potential treatment adjustment required moving several key dates, but didn't fundamentally alter the strategy. What strikes me, Elizabeth observed as we updated the timeline, is how differently you're handling uncertainty now compared to when your diagnosis was first confirmed. There's a flexibility in your approach that wasn't present initially. Her observation was accurate. Early in my cancer journey, each treatment adjustment or timeline shift had triggered intense anxiety and compulsive planning. Now, while still maintaining necessary strategic overview, I could accommodate changes without experiencing them as fundamental threats to control or security. I think experiencing true betrayal clarifies what constitutes actual threat versus mere uncertainty, I reflected. Michael's actions were deliberately harmful. Treatment adjustments are simply reality requiring adaptation. As evening approached, I continued working through the perspective expansion exercises Elizabeth had provided, finding particular value in one that prompted identification of unexpected positive developments emerging from challenging circumstances. The betrayal had revealed structural weaknesses in my life that might otherwise have remained unaddressed indefinitely. Financial entanglements that created vulnerability, relationship patterns that substituted practical accommodation for genuine intimacy, professional identity that overshadowed broader purpose exploration. Cancer had stripped away distractions and non-essentials, creating clarity about priorities and values that might have remained obscured in healthier circumstances. The combined impact of these simultaneous crises had catalyzed more authentic self-evaluation and purposeful redirection than might have occurred through decades of gradual evolution. This expanded perspective didn't minimize the genuine pain and challenge of my circumstances. Cancer remained a formidable adversary, requiring all available resources to combat. Michael's betrayal during my most vulnerable period remained an act of profound selfishness deserving appropriate consequences. But these realities could coexist with recognition of unexpected growth and opportunity emerging from the very circumstances I would never have chosen, but now navigated with increasing clarity. Evening medicines arrived, and as the nurse checked my temperature and adjusted monitors, she mentioned, "Your husband was quite insistent about seeing you earlier. Security had to firmly redirect him to the main exit." "Former husband," I corrected gently. "We're separated pending divorce proceedings." She looked momentarily embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "No apology necessary," I assured her. "It's a recent development." After she left, Elizabeth said, "You handled that gracefully. 6 weeks ago, that interaction might have triggered significant distress." She was right. The simple act of publicly acknowledging the marriage's end without emotional flooding or defensive explanation represented meaningful progress. The expanded perspective gained through intentional reflection had created emotional space around circumstances that previously felt suffocatingly immediate. As visiting hours ended, Elizabeth gathered her things, promising to return early the following morning with fresh supplies and updates from Anthony. Left alone in the quieting hospital, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today marks an unexpected expansion of perspective. What initially felt like strategic retreat due to medical necessity has created space for essential reflection beyond immediate tactical concerns. From this temporary vantage point, I can see patterns and possibilities previously obscured by urgent demands. The path forward involves not just resolving current challenges, but consciously creating a life architecture that better supports authentic purpose and meaningful connection. Michael's betrayal and cancer's intrusion have revealed structural weaknesses that can now be addressed in reconstruction. Most significantly, I'm beginning to recognize that resilience isn't merely about withstanding difficulty, but about extracting wisdom and direction from it. Every challenge contains embedded opportunity for recalibration and redirection towards greater alignment with core values and authentic purpose. This expanded perspective doesn't eliminate the pain of betrayal or the fear accompanying illness, but it does provide context that transforms them from merely destructive experiences into potentially constructive catalysts for meaningful transformation. I closed the journal and adjusted my position in the hospital bed, allowing myself to acknowledge both the physical discomfort of my current circumstances and the emerging clarity they had unexpectedly facilitated. Tomorrow would bring continued medical interventions, legal developments, and strategic adjustments. But tonight had brought something equally valuable: expanded perspective that transformed how I understood and navigated this challenging chapter in my life story. On the third day of my hospitalization, my medical condition began showing significant improvement. The preventive antibiotics had successfully warded off infection, while my neutrophil counts gradually increased toward safer levels. Dr. Ellis had cautiously upgraded her prognosis, suggesting I might be discharged the following day if current trends continued. The improved medical outlook coincided with strategic developments on the legal front. Anthony arrived mid-morning, impeccably dressed as always, but with an enthusiasm that suggested favorable news. Michael's attorneys have presented an initial settlement proposal, he announced after exchanging pleasantries with Elizabeth. It's inadequate in several key areas, but the mere fact they've initiated settlement discussions this early represents a significant shift in approach. I adjusted my position in the hospital bed, grateful that today's improved energy levels allowed me to engage fully with these developments. What are they offering? Anthony opened his briefcase and extracted a document folder. In broad terms, they're proposing a clean division of assets with minimal ongoing entanglement. Michael would retain full ownership of his business with no claim on your executive compensation package or retirement accounts. You would retain the primary residence, with Michael assuming the remaining mortgage obligation. And the financial aspects? I inquired, noting what appeared to be deliberate omissions in this overview. That's where their proposal falls significantly short, Anthony confirmed. They've offered a one-time settlement of $175,000 to address all outstanding financial claims, including the misappropriated medical funds. They've also requested mutual non-disclosure agreements regarding the circumstances of the separation. Elizabeth made a disapproving sound from her position by the window. He steals cancer treatment funds for a luxury vacation with his mistress, and then wants to buy silence about his behavior? Typical. Anthony nodded grimly. The NDA request is particularly telling. Michael appears primarily concerned with protecting his professional reputation and business relationships. This information crystallized something I had been considering since my perspective expansion exercises the previous day. Michael's primary vulnerability wasn't financial, but reputational. His business success depended heavily on his carefully cultivated image as a trustworthy, ethical developer with strong community connections. That image wouldn't survive public knowledge of how he had abandoned his cancer-stricken wife, stolen medical funds, and disappeared to Bali with a significantly younger employee. This creates interesting leverage for negotiating more favorable financial terms, I observed. But it also presents an opportunity for more creative solutions aligned with my evolving priorities. Anthony raised an eyebrow. What are you considering? An unconventional settlement structure, I explained, focused less on maximizing my financial gain and more on creating meaningful impact aligned with my emerging purpose. Over the next hour, I outlined an alternative settlement framework incorporating elements that might initially seem unrelated to divorce proceedings, but aligned perfectly with my expanded perspective on purpose and legacy. Instead of simply negotiating for a larger lump sum payment, I proposed, I want to establish a foundation focused on addressing financial toxicity for cancer patients. Michael would make an initial endowment of $500,000, plus annual contributions of $100,000 for 5 years. Anthony listened with professional interest, taking careful notes. That's an innovative approach. But what would motivate Michael to accept these terms rather than simply offering you personally a larger settlement? 3 factors, I replied, drawing on both my financial expertise and newfound clarity about human motivation. First, contributing to a foundation offers significant tax advantages compared to direct payment to me. Second, it provides positive publicity that could counterbalance any potential reputational damage if our divorce circumstances became public. And third, the foundation would bear my name alone, not his, a detail that would subtly reinforce accountability while allowing him to claim ethical redress without direct personal association. As I elaborated on the structure, Anthony's expression shifted from professional assessment to genuine appreciation. This is remarkably sophisticated. Catherine, it transforms what could be merely punitive into something constructive while still maintaining appropriate accountability. It also aligns with my evolving professional vision, I added. The foundation could partner with the hospital system to develop and implement innovative approaches to reducing financial barriers to cancer treatment, creating a bridge between my personal experience and professional expertise. Elizabeth had been listening quietly, but now joined the conversation. You're essentially transforming personal injury into systemic healing. That's powerful alchemy. Her framing resonated deeply. The settlement structure wasn't merely clever negotiation, but tangible manifestation of my transformation, converting betrayal's pain into purposeful impact that extended far beyond my individual circumstances. Anthony made additional notes before asking, what about the primary residence? The mortgage assumption is actually favorable to you financially. I don't want the house, I said with certainty that surprised even me. Too many associations, with a relationship built on incomplete foundations. I'd prefer liquidity to establish a new home environment aligned with my current needs and values. We continued refining the settlement framework until it represented a comprehensive approach, addressing both practical needs and purposeful vision. Anthony would present this counter-proposal to Michael's attorneys the following day, positioning it as an opportunity for constructive resolution rather than punitive extraction. After Anthony departed, promising updates following the scheduled negotiation session, Elizabeth studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. That was impressive strategic thinking, especially given your current physical challenges. How are you feeling? Tired but purposeful, I replied honestly. For the first time since diagnosis, I feel genuinely energized by future possibilities, rather than merely determined to survive present challenges. Our conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, Janet Chen, my colleague and interim replacement at the hospital. She entered carrying an elegant arrangement of purple hydrangeas and white lilies. These are from the executive leadership team, she explained, placing them on the bedside table. Everyone sends their best wishes for your recovery. The formal message conveyed professional courtesy, but Janet's personal presence suggested more meaningful purpose. After exchanging updates about my condition and hospital operations, she hesitated before addressing what appeared to be her actual reason for visiting. Catherine, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding limited remote engagement during your recovery, she began carefully. The board is establishing a special committee to address financial barriers to care completion, particularly in oncology services. They've specifically requested your involvement as an advisor, if medically appropriate. The synchronicity with my emerging purpose was striking. The very morning I had articulated a vision for transforming personal experience into systemic improvement, an institutional pathway for that transformation appeared. That's remarkable timing, I replied. I've been reconsidering my professional focus based on my experiences as both healthcare finance executive and cancer patient. This committee aligns perfectly with that emerging direction. Janet smiled with evident relief. I hoped you'd see it that way. The initial scope would involve just monthly virtual participation during your treatment, with potential for expanded engagement during recovery based on your capacity and interest. This development represented more than convenient professional opportunity. It constituted emergence of important alliance structures supporting my transformation blueprint, relationships and institutional frameworks that could help translate personal insight into meaningful systemic change. After Janet departed, promising to send formal committee information once I was discharged, Elizabeth observed, "Alliances are forming around your emerging purpose. That's significant validation." Her comment highlighted an aspect of my journey I hadn't fully appreciated. Throughout my career, I had cultivated professional relationships focused primarily on organizational objectives rather than personal mission. Now, as my authentic purpose crystallized through challenging circumstances, different kinds of alliances were naturally forming. Connections based on shared values and meaningful impact rather than merely institutional affiliation. This pattern extended beyond professional contexts. My relationship with Elizabeth had evolved from typical sibling connection to profound partnership in transformation. My engagement with Anthony had transcended standard attorney-client dynamics to become collaborative creation of innovative solutions aligned with evolving purpose. Even my medical team relationships were transforming. Dr. Ellis entered for afternoon rounds, reviewing my latest blood work with evident satisfaction. Your neutrophils continue improving impressively. We're on track for discharge tomorrow morning if current trends hold. She completed her clinical assessment before adding something personal. Catherine, your nurse mentioned you might be involved with the new Financial Barriers Committee. If appropriate, I'd be interested in contributing clinical perspective to that work. My patients' experiences with treatment abandonment due to financial constraints represent a critical gap in our care model. Her offer represented another alliance forming around my emerging purpose, clinical expertise, complementing financial systems knowledge to address a challenge I now understood from multiple perspectives. As evening approached, bringing the gentle rhythm of shift changes and medication rounds, I reflected on this pattern of alliance formation. My journal entry captured this emerging understanding. Today revealed a profound truth about transformation. Meaningful change rarely occurs in isolation. As my authentic purpose clarifies through these challenging circumstances, appropriate alliances naturally form to support its expression. These aren't merely strategic partnerships, but organic connections emerging around shared values and complementary capabilities. Michael's betrayal temporarily severed what I perceived as my primary alliance, triggering fears of fundamental isolation during life's most challenging journey. Yet that severing has paradoxically created space for more authentic connections, aligned with my emerging truth rather than comfortable compromise. The foundation concept transforms even Michael's betrayal into potential alliance for systemic healing, not through reconciliation, but through appropriate redirection of resources toward constructive purpose. This represents my most profound learning. Nothing, not even profound betrayal, falls outside the potential circumference of meaningful transformation when viewed through sufficiently expanded perspective. My reflection was interrupted by a text message from Anthony. Michael's attorneys have requested 24 hours to review our counterproposal before formal response. However, initial reaction suggests openness to foundation concept with modified terms. We'll update following tomorrow's discussion. This preliminary response confirmed my assessment of Michael's motivations and vulnerabilities. The foundation structure offered him pathway toward resolution that protected core priorities, his business reputation and community standing, while still providing meaningful accountability and restitution. As night settled over the hospital, bringing relative quiet to the typically bustling environment, I found myself contemplating the remarkable alchemy occurring through these challenging circumstances. Cancer and betrayal, experiences I would never have consciously chosen, were catalyzing clarification of purpose and formation of alliances that might otherwise have remained undeveloped. Elizabeth had returned to my house to retrieve items for my anticipated discharge, leaving me alone with these reflections. The solitude felt different now. Not isolation imposed by illness and betrayal, but temporary space for integration and assimilation of emerging understanding. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. A different nurse entered, one I hadn't met during previous shifts. "Dr. Harrington, I'm Sophia, covering tonight's shift. I just wanted to introduce myself and see if you needed anything before things quiet down for the night." "I'm comfortable, thank you," I replied, noting her relatively young age and slightly nervous demeanor. She checked the monitors efficiently before adding, "I hope you don't mind my mentioning this, but I attended your presentation on healthcare finance at last year's Nurse Leadership Conference. Your explanation of how budget decisions impact patient care delivery made complex systems understandable for clinicians. It actually influenced my decision to pursue the financial management track in my nursing administration program." This unexpected connection reinforced the day's theme of emerging alliances. Even brief professional interactions from the past had planted seeds for potential future collaboration aligned with my evolving purpose. "I'm glad the presentation was helpful," I replied with genuine appreciation. The intersection of financial systems and patient care delivery remains critically important, particularly in addressing barriers to care completion. "Exactly," she agreed enthusiastically. "My capstone project actually focuses on financial navigation services for oncology patients. The data on treatment abandonment due to financial toxicity is heartbreaking, especially knowing effective interventions exist but aren't systematically implemented." Our conversation continued briefly, touching on innovative approaches being tested at other institutions and potential applications within our system. Though just a 15-minute exchange during routine care delivery, it represented another thread in the emerging tapestry of aligned relationships forming around my clarifying purpose. After Sophia departed, I made a final journal entry before sleep. Today's experiences confirm that as authentic purpose emerges through challenging circumstances, appropriate alliances naturally form to support its expression. These connections transcend conventional categories, personal and professional, formal and informal, creating an integrated network aligned with meaningful impact. The transformation occurring isn't merely personal reinvention, but emergence of collaborative capacity addressing challenges I now understand from multiple perspectives. Cancer and betrayal haven't simply changed me. They've clarified what contribution I'm uniquely positioned to make and connected me with others essential to that contribution's realization. This understanding transforms tomorrow's anticipated hospital discharge from merely medical milestone to meaningful threshold in a journey extending far beyond personal recovery to purposeful impact. Each challenge navigated provides not just greater resilience but deeper clarity about the unique contribution these difficult experiences have prepared me to make. As sleep approached, I felt profound gratitude for this emerging clarity, not despite the challenging circumstances that had catalyzed it, but inclusive of them as essential elements in a transformation more comprehensive than I could have previously imagined or intentionally designed. Hospital discharge day arrived with a sense of measured victory. My neutrophil counts had stabilized at acceptable levels, and Dr. Ellis had cleared me to return home with appropriate precautions. The immunotherapy initiation would be delayed by only 1 week, a manageable adjustment to my treatment timeline. As the discharge nurse reviewed my home care instructions, Anthony arrived with news that would significantly impact the day's trajectory. Michael's attorneys have responded to our settlement proposal, he announced once we had privacy. They're amenable to the foundation concept, but have proposed substantial modifications to the financial structure and governance model. I reviewed the document he provided, quickly identifying the strategic implications. Michael had accepted the foundation framework, but proposed changes that would grant him significant control over its governance while reducing his financial commitment by nearly half. This counterproposal reveals something important, I observed. He recognizes the reputational benefits of association with a cancer support foundation, but wants to convert it from accountability mechanism to image rehabilitation project. Anthony nodded. Precisely my assessment. The question now is how to respond. We're in a strong negotiating position, but finding the right balance between appropriate accountability and practical resolution remains the challenge. This represented the first major decision point since my hospital confinement, a pivotal moment requiring integration of legal strategy, financial assessment, and alignment with my evolving purpose. The timing was particularly significant, occurring precisely as I prepared to leave the protective hospital environment and return to the world where these negotiations had real consequences. Elizabeth, who had arrived earlier with clothes and transportation for my discharge, observed my concentrated examination of the documents. What's your instinct, Catherine? That this represents both challenge and opportunity, I replied, my finance training automatically calculating optimal negotiating positions. Michael is attempting to redirect our proposal to serve his interests while maintaining its surface appearance. The appropriate response isn't outright rejection, but strategic recalibration that preserves core elements while accommodating peripheral modifications. I spent the next 30 minutes outlining a structured counteroffer that maintained the foundation's independence and financial viability, while allowing Michael limited recognition benefits that would incentivize his agreement without compromising the initiative's integrity. The governance structure remains non-negotiable, I explained to Anthony. I'll accept the reduced initial endowment if the ongoing annual contributions are legally secured and front-loaded to ensure program sustainability. He can have the public recognition elements he's seeking, the annual fundraising gala and donor appreciation program, but cannot serve on the governing board or influence grant distribution criteria. Anthony made detailed notes, his expression reflecting professional appreciation for the balanced approach. This maintains accountability while providing face-saving elements he clearly values. Excellent strategy. As we finalized the response document, a hospital administrator arrived with my discharge paperwork. The transition from patient to outgoing executive was almost comical in its abruptness. One moment receiving medical instructions, the next negotiating million-dollar settlement terms. You realize most people don't conduct high-stakes divorce negotiations during hospital discharge, Elizabeth remarked with subtle humor as she packed my belongings. But then again, you've never taken the conventional path. Necessity dictates timing, I replied, signing the final discharge forms. And there's something symbolically appropriate about addressing these matters at this particular threshold between medical confinement and re-engagement with broader life. The drive home provided opportunity to prepare mentally for re-entering the environment I had abruptly left 4 days earlier. Elizabeth had ensured the house was properly maintained during my absence, but returning to the space Michael and I had shared for nearly 2 decades would inevitably trigger complex emotions. Anthony mentioned that Michael has removed his essential belongings, Elizabeth said as we approached the neighborhood. The security system recordings show he came with movers while you were hospitalized. This information provided both practical reassurance and emotional complexity. The potential for uncomfortable direct encounter had been removed, yet Michael's swift extraction of his possessions reflected how definitively our shared life had concluded. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed subtle but significant changes to the property. The landscaping crew had transformed the formerly neglected garden into orderly beauty. The house exterior had been professionally cleaned, removing the accumulation of pollen and dust that had built up during my treatment months. Even the front door displayed a fresh coat of paint, in a shade I had always preferred but Michael had resisted. "You've been busy," I observed to Elizabeth as we entered. "Not just me," she corrected. "This represents the first manifestation of your alliance formation. When word spread about your hospitalization and circumstances, people stepped forward, without being asked." Inside, the transformation continued. The living room had been subtly rearranged, removing Michael's oversized leather chair that had dominated the space while repositioning remaining furniture to create a more balanced, open environment. Fresh flowers adorned the central table, and the bookshelves had been reorganized to prominently feature my preferred literature, rather than the status-signaling art books Michael had insisted on displaying. "Janet organized a support rotation," Elizabeth explained. "Different colleagues have handled specific aspects of preparation for your return. The kitchen is stocked with prepared meals. Your home office has been equipped with everything needed for remote work during recovery, and the master suite has been completely refreshed." This coordinated support represented something profound, tangible manifestation of the alliance formation that had begun during my hospitalization. The theoretical connections established around shared purpose had translated into practical action supporting my recovery and transition. After settling in and taking necessary medications, I joined Elizabeth in the kitchen where she prepared tea using the immune-supporting blend she had formulated. My energy remained limited, a common pattern following hospitalization. But the mental clarity I had developed during my medical confinement persisted. "Anthony will present our counter-proposal at tomorrow morning's negotiation session," I noted, reviewing the finalized document. "The foundation framework represents the ideal integration of accountability, purpose, and practical resolution. It transforms something potentially destructive into something constructive," Elizabeth agreed. "But Catherine, I'm concerned about the concentrated focus on settlement negotiations immediately following discharge. Your body needs recovery time." Her concern was valid but reflected incomplete understanding of my integrated approach. "This isn't merely legal strategy, Elizabeth. It's purposeful engagement aligned with my transformation blueprint. The foundation concept represents tangible manifestation of my expanded perspective, converting betrayal's pain into meaningful impact." Before she could respond, my phone chimed with an unexpected notification, an email from Michael directly rather than through legal representatives. The subject line read, "Personal communication, settlement considerations." Elizabeth noticed my expression. "What is it?" "Michael attempting end run around established communication protocols," I replied, opening the message with appropriate caution. The email was brief but revealing. "Catherine, I understand the foundation proposal reflects important principles for you. Before our attorneys finalize terms, I'd like to discuss this directly. Some aspects have personal significance, beyond legal considerations. If you're willing, please call me to arrange a private conversation outside formal negotiations. Michael." This outreach represented classic Michael strategy, seeking to leverage personal connection to gain negotiating advantage when formal processes appeared unfavorable. Throughout our marriage, he had consistently utilized direct emotional appeals to circumvent structured decision-making that didn't favor his preferred outcomes. In previous circumstances, this approach had often succeeded. My desire for harmony and tendency to accommodate had made me vulnerable to precisely this kind of procedural circumvention. The pivotal question now was whether my transformation had developed sufficient depth to maintain appropriate boundaries despite familiar emotional triggers. He's attempting to re-establish direct influence channels, I observed, showing Elizabeth the message. This represents significant validation of our negotiating position's strength. He perceives the formal process as unfavorable to his interests. How will you respond? Elizabeth asked, her expression concerned. The question represented the pivotal challenge of this phase in my journey. Maintaining clear boundaries and appropriate processes despite appeals to established patterns and emotional familiarity. My response would demonstrate whether my transformation had developed sufficient substance to withstand direct testing. I composed a brief, clear reply. Michael, all communication regarding settlement must proceed through our respective legal counsel. Anthony Reeves remains authorized to negotiate all terms on my behalf. Catherine. The simplicity of this response belied its significance. In just 2 sentences, I had established unambiguous boundaries, maintained appropriate process integrity, and demonstrated that emotional appeals would not circumvent formal channels established for my protection. Most importantly, I had accomplished this without defensive elaboration or reactive emotion, simply clear, direct maintenance of necessary structure. After sending the response, I felt a subtle but significant shift in my relationship with the negotiation process. What had begun as primarily defensive protection of financial interests had evolved into an opportunity for demonstrating and strengthening my psychological sovereignty. Each maintained boundary and upheld process represented not just strategic advantage, but personal reclamation. Well done, Elizabeth said quietly, observing my calm determination. 6 months ago, that direct appeal would have likely succeeded in pulling you into private negotiation outside established protections. 6 months ago, I was operating from a fundamentally different self-concept, I acknowledged. Cancer and betrayal have provided painful but effective clarity about both my capabilities and my requirements for authentic engagement. My phone chimed again, another message from Michael. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. Persistent, isn't he? This message revealed escalating emotional tactics. Catherine, we were married for 19 years. Surely we can have one conversation without attorneys filtering everything. There are aspects of this situation you don't fully understand. Please call me. It's important. The appeal to our shared history combined with vague suggestion of undisclosed information represented classic manipulation techniques. The implied promise of special knowledge accessible only through direct communication was particularly transparent, a common approach Michael had used throughout our marriage when standard persuasion proved insufficient. My response maintained the same clear boundary. Michael, all communication must proceed through legal counsel. Any relevant information should be shared through appropriate channels. Catherine, no defensive explanation. No engagement with emotional appeals. No curiosity about alleged undisclosed information. Simply consistent maintenance of necessary boundaries and established processes. A third message arrived almost immediately. This isn't like you, Catherine. You've always valued direct communication. Who's influencing your decisions? Please call me. If not for me, then for the history we shared. This progression revealed increasing desperation, first attempting procedural circumvention, then implying withheld information, now questioning my agency, and appealing to relationship history. The pattern was remarkably transparent when viewed with newly developed clarity. I showed Elizabeth the message sequence without immediately responding. Notice the escalation pattern. Each attempt reflects increasingly manipulative tactics while revealing growing recognition that previous influence channels no longer function. What's your next step? She asked. No further direct response, I decided. I've established the boundary clearly and consistently. Continued engagement only rewards persistence and suggests potential vulnerability. Instead, I'll forward the entire exchange to Anthony, so he's fully informed before tomorrow's negotiation. This decision represented significant evolution in my response to emotional manipulation. Rather than engaging defensive explanation or succumbing to curiosity about alleged undisclosed information, I recognized the tactical nature of these approaches and maintained appropriate distance while ensuring my legal representation had complete context. After forwarding the exchange to Anthony with brief contextual notes, I turned my attention to the hospital committee invitation Janet had mentioned. The formal documentation had arrived during my discharge process, outlining the initiative addressing financial barriers to care completion. Reviewing this material provided welcome transition from defensive boundary maintenance to proactive purpose engagement. The committee's preliminary scope aligned perfectly with my emerging vision, creating systematic approaches to reducing financial toxicity for cancer patients while leveraging both institutional resources and community partnerships. As evening approached, bringing gentle rain that complemented the reflective mood, I updated my transformation blueprint to incorporate insights gained through the day's pivotal challenge. My journal entry captured this integration. Today demonstrated the tangible manifestation of theoretical transformation. The boundary maintenance with Michael wasn't merely negotiating strategy, but embodied reclamation of psychological sovereignty. Each clear, consistent response represented not just what I wouldn't accept, but what I now require for authentic engagement. The pivotal challenge wasn't merely maintaining advantage in divorce proceedings, but demonstrating integrated alignment between conceptual transformation and practical implementation. The foundation framework similarly represents concrete manifestation of expanded perspective, converting circumstances that could generate only bitterness into potential vehicles for meaningful impact. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.